Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching A Healthcare Z. Today's topic is accounting of deception in healthcare. Now, I have made over 200 A Healthcare Z videos over the past year and a half, and what I have here is a list of 32 different examples of deception in healthcare, because it is a common theme throughout all of these videos that I've done, and I wanted to put them all in one place for several reasons. One, to show that it occurs across all the different players in healthcare. So I've listed out the deception by doctors and hospitals and insurance carriers and PBMs and pharma medical devices and the government and private equity firms. So it's not like one group does it and the other group doesn't. It's spread across multiple areas. And then I also want to go through each of these now, and I will leave a link in the show notes to all the A Healthcare Z videos that actually go through each of these topics in detail. Okay, one, underneath physicians, doctor conflict of interest disclosure in research. So doctors don't disclose all of their financial conflicts of interest in their research papers. Two, doctor resistance to pharma open payments. So physicians essentially had to be forced to disclose the amount of money that they receive from pharmaceutical companies that is now shown in open payments. They did not voluntarily do this. Next up, a lack of orthopedic recommendations for choosing wisely. So the Choosing Wisely campaign is to increase quality and to decrease unnecessary care tests and procedures. And the orthopedic recommendations are like incredibly minuscule. They're like this. Like, in my opinion, there's like no real orthopedics recommendations for choosing wisely. They've got a gazillion other specialties, but orthopedics didn't really weigh in a significant way. Okay, next up, US Oncology, the largest group of private oncologists in America, is owned by McKesson, which is a pharmaceutical distribution company. So in other words, the medications that are being used, the chemotherapy that's being used by US Oncology physicians is being distributed by the company that owns them. Okay, next up, physician-owned distributors. That's right. So physicians that are surgeons will actually own the middlemen, distribution companies that supply the implants, screws, etc., so that not only can the physician make money off of the actual surgery, but they can make money off of being the reseller of the actual piece of surgical equipment that they're using. Okay, next up, surprise out-of-network bills for pathologists, radiologists, and anesthesiologists. You don't know who these people are. You walk into a hospital and they are out of network and there's like nothing you can do about it and there's no disclosure about it. Next up, RUC, which is the Relative Value Unit Update Committee. There is a secret committee of physicians that decides how much the physicians are going to be paid by Medicare. It's secret. And Medicare still takes their recommendations. Next up, hidden out-of-network facilities. So here you have physicians that are part owners in facilities where the physician will actually be in network, but they have made their facility, like their surgery center or their endoscopy center, out of network, or their urgent care facility or emergency center. Okay, so those are doctor examples. Next up, hospital examples. Okay, ambulatory surgery center, hospital joint ventures, where not only are the physicians partial owners in the ambulatory surgery center, but the hospital is also a part owner in the ambulatory surgery center, and so they get to run the contracts through the much more highly reimbursed hospital contracts with the insurance carriers, as opposed to as an independent ASC, thereby increasing the remuneration of the doctors from the facility fees. Next up, hospital outpatient department pricing. So this is where a hospital will buy a physician practice, and for the tests and procedures done in that physician practice, they'll code it as though it's an outpatient department of the hospital, and therefore get paid more than if it was just done in a physician's office, even though it still is just a physician's office. Okay, next up, charge capture. In other words, the way that different diagnoses are coded determines how they're reimbursed. And so sepsis, the amount of coding for sepsis, which is a severe systemic body infection, has dramatically increased when Medicare decided to pay a lot more for sepsis. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, there started to end up being a lot more sepsis in America, or at least there was a lot more coding of sepsis in America. All right, next up, blocking referrals. So this is when a hospital system, if it buys a physician group, it will potentially dictate where the physicians refer their patients to. So in other words, the cardiologist would have to refer to this particular cardiothoracic surgeon for, let's say, heart bypass surgery. The fact that they are quote unquote required or tied to do that or strongly encouraged to do that is not always disclosed to the patients. Okay, next up. Hospital cost to charge ratio as like being the quote unquote cost. So I just did a video about this where the way that hospital accounting is done, it really does not accurately determine what the cost of a test or procedure is. Okay, next up, hospital ASCs are bought and then it's not disclosed. So this is where an independent ASC might have on the front door, it might say XYZ Ambulatory Surgery Center, but then it's bought by the hospital. They don't change the sign on the front. So you still think you're going to an independent ambulatory surgery center, but now it's being billed through the hospital and it becomes 3 to 5 times more expensive. Okay, next up, hospital imaging centers bought and not disclosed. Same exact thing. It's an independent imaging center. You could get an MRI for cheap, like $250 for an MRI. Hospital buys it. They don't change the sign on the front. All of a sudden, that MRI becomes $2,000 because the hospital bought it and it's never disclosed to the patients. Okay, next up, dialysis companies that actually fund kidney charities. So this is where people who need dialysis, who can't afford their insurance premium, are actually signing up for charity programs to pay the premium for them, and the charity program is actually funded by the dialysis company. And the dialysis company wants to do that because if the patient can pay their insurance premium, then the reimbursement is infinitely more. I shouldn't say infinitely more. It's a lot more than if they ended up having to go on Medicare. Okay, next up. So those are the hospital ones. Now we're going to move over to insurance. Okay, so one, PPO discounts. The idea of a discount off of a almost like made up bill charge amount, and that is somehow being of value. That is deceptive. Okay, value-based payments, which are highly touted by insurance carriers. Blue Cross Executive has come out and said that 90% of the payments in value-based contracts are still just straight fee-for-service. It's not value-based, it's fee-for-service-based, which, oh, by the way, just happens to have 10% value in it. Okay, next up, wellness dollars being paid back to employers. So this is where tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars are paid back to employers in the form of wellness dollars just because they're being overcharged by their insurance carrier. The insurance carrier could just like not charge them as much in the first place, but they don't. Okay, next up, the mcgcare guidelines. So this is a company that is owned by Hearst Health and Hearst that actually dictates the clinical guidelines for the vast majority of prior authorizations, pre-certifications, the number of days you can stay in a hospital, and it is not like openly disclosed where these rules come from. Like you don't know where these rules come from, and oftentimes the mcgcare guidelines are kept in the background behind the insurance company. So you think it's the insurance company making up the rules, and it's not. It's mcgcare guidelines. Okay, next up, carriers owning hospital consulting companies. So this is where a major insurance carriers owns a consulting company whose customers are hospitals. And the consulting company shows the hospitals how to bill the insurance company for more money. So here you have the insurance company trying to save the plan money, yet they own a division that is trying to show hospitals how to take more money from the plan. That seems to be a conflict that is not openly disclosed, so it seems to be deceptive. Okay, next up, we're moving on to PBMs. So I just showed a video about AWP and how AWP it's kind of like the PPO discount in the PBM world, right? It's a fictitious price that they claim a quote-unquote discount off of, and so a discount off a fictitious price isn't necessarily of any value. Next up, SureScripts, which is the electronic mediary between electronic prescription order entry and the pharmacies themselves. So the doc can just type into their EMR, hey, give this person a Medrol dose pack of steroids or what have you. So when other entrants like Amazon try to get into electronic prescribing, SureScripts blocks them because it's already owned by the existing PBMs. Next up, spread pricing, which I've already talked about in a previous video as well, where it's closely related to AWP, where the PBM is essentially charging the plan much more than what they're paying the pharmacy for that medication, and they're making the difference off the spread. Okay, now moving on to pharmaceutical companies themselves. The entire opioid crisis, the fact that the pharmaceutical companies knew that opioids were addictive and they knew they were much more dangerous, but it was not disclosed. Okay, next up. Lotions versus creams on the price. So this is where, for dermatologic creams or lotions, the exact same medication can be put in a cream or a lotion. But what's the difference between a cream or a lotion? Like, not that much. Yet the cream costs like $1.98, and a lotion costs hundreds of dollars. Okay, and oh, by the way, it's the hundreds of dollar lotion that is promoted in the doctor's office, not the really cheap cream. Okay, next up, pharmaceutical funded research that used to block negative studies. So until there was trials registries and opentrials.gov, you didn't know if a pharmaceutical company sponsored a trial and found that like the drug or device like didn't work. You only saw the studies where it worked. And so it's called publication bias. And so as a result of that, people would think that all these things would work because you didn't see the negative studies. Now, pharma had to be forced to disclose these negative studies. Okay, next up, combo pills and extended release pills. So this is where they'll put two medications that are incredibly cheap, put them together in one pill, and charge $1 gazillion for them. Likewise, extended release pills. Instead of taking a pill in the morning and a pill in the evening, they put a special coating on it so you only have to take it once a day, and then they charge 5, 10, 20 times more for that exact same medication. They don't necessarily tell you, look, you could just take it twice a day. Okay, next up, we're moving on to the government. Now, there were falsified wait lists at the VA. You would have to wait at the VA, and the VAs themselves made up how long you had to wait for because the actual wait times were longer than what they said that they were. Next up, regulatory capture. So this is where the government agency that's supposed to be watchdogging the industry is actually controlled by the industry. Okay, next up, we're moving on to private equity firms and their ownership of physician practices. And they do things that are not necessarily patient-friendly for the sake of making more money. Next up, private equity ownership of medical helicopters. So this is where they're not in network and they are essentially charging tens of thousands or even close to $100,000 for very brief helicopter rides. No disclosure to the patient, and they're really getting stuck with these massive bills in retrospect. So, the deception is all over the place. And again, I want to say this for a few reasons. One, if you're a medical journalist or a healthcare journalist and you're like looking for something to write about, here are some ideas. Two, I have not covered all the areas of deception. So I want you, the viewers, to write down what other types of deception you've seen that I'm not covering here. And then three, it just points out that we need to clean up healthcare. Not only for patients, but there are wonderful people that work in all of these areas who are honest and upright people. I'm not getting on any sort of moral high horse here at all. I myself have many flaws, but there are many wonderful people that work in all of these areas, and they deserve to earn an honest day's living. Let's put them in an industry where they can earn an honest day's living. And that's my point for today. Thank you for watching A Healthcare Z.